Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, I sit down with a friend and fellow leadership podcaster. Also buried within the episode is a brain rot Easter egg. But I'll warn you, if you don't have teenagers in the house, there is only a 6 or 7% chance that you will find it. Erin Thorpe, welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. It is so good to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you. I was just sitting here as we were getting ready to go, and I'm like, wow, it's different to be on this side of the microphone, right? Like I'm on the opposite side of the screen. I don't have the controls. Anyway, it's fabulous. I'm glad to be here.
You're not wrong. It's almost a different mindset, at least as I've been on podcasts, between hosting it and being a guest. So welcome to the freer side of the mind. You get to just go along for the ride for the next hour here. I
love it.
So the reason that I am as excited about this conversation as I have been, this is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time, and it's that you and I have a lot of key career experiences that are similar, that were very early in our career. They were very formative in our career, and we can look where we are now in our mid-career. Both of us are podcasting about leadership. A lot of it is because of the experiences that formed opinions very early. And so at some level, the part that I'm most excited about is I believe that you and I have walked similar roads. We've only met recently, but as I've listened to your podcast, as I've read your content, I do feel a kindred nature to your approach to leadership, the thoughts that you have about leadership. And so I'm excited to explore the various avenues. We'll start off right with the bang. You tell a story early in your career that was a very formative experience for you professionally. You were in the construction industry. If you wouldn't mind, Erin, just share that story around you being too emotional to lead.
Yeah, for sure. So, I went into construction. I happened to get an internship during my degree, and it was in construction, not in design. It was one of those things I felt like I just needed to say yes to it. The interviewer and I got along great. I didn't really have a set out plan to be in construction, let's say. And it was fairly soon into that internship that I realized that all of the engineers that I was interacting with building this building had never actually spent time on the building side. And I was having to make calls as the student in the field, like, hey, all this rebar you just detailed doesn't actually fit in the formwork. Like, it's lines on the drawing, but it has a dimension and it doesn't fit, and we're getting into these like arguments about it. And I took, I have a fairly high bar for myself of my own expectations, how I want to show up, the work I want to do in the world. And some people might label that as passion, right?
Right.
But for me, very early on in my career, I think there was a few things that I was overcoming. One, I was often the only female on the job site. I was a student. I was young. I was like 20 years old when this was happening. And I was in charge. I was the project engineer on charge of this construction site. And so a lot of the times, my passion came out through tears, and, my voice would crack and it would get shaky and my cheeks would get red and I would flush and I'd have to go to my office and close the door and have a cry and come back out and, do all these things. And so throughout that internship and then the first few years as I went back into construction, because I realized I had a lot more to learn about how things went together if I ever wanted to sit in the design chair, the piece of feedback that I always would get from my leadership was, you need to toughen up. You need to be less emotional, get a game face, like kind of that, I don't know, I grew up with this commercial around like never let them see you sweat sort of thing, like
right.
just kind of show up and be the same all the time.
Stoicism at some level.
Yeah. And it was really interesting to me because I honestly did not know how to do that. I did not know how to do that. And it seemed like, it didn't seem like it was actually true. The harder I tried to not have feelings, the more feelings I had. The harder I tried to just like let it roll off my back or not have a reaction, that lack or that unwillingness maybe of facing that and actually dealing with it and kind of getting curious about, okay, what is this? Why do we feel this way? What's the root cause? The more I just tried to ignore all that and just plow through, like the worse it got. And the less I was able to hide it, the more it would come out at the worst time. And then I kind of got to this point where I got really, really irritated and pretty pissed off, to be honest with you, because I'm watching everyone else around and like people are throwing hammers across the boardroom and, slamming doors and punching walls. And I'm like, how is that not labeled as emotional? Like,
sure.
That's a big feeling if I've ever seen one. It just didn't come out the same way I did. I wasn't punching walls. I was just crying. But, so it was, that was sort of my early on experience with, I'm too emotional. And no leader could ever tell me there was never any, here's what you need to do to kind of master this side of yourself. It was just like, toughen up.
Yeah.
Just don't be emotional. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And I probably spent 10 years trying to not be emotional, trying to like excavate this piece of me out that I'm so glad I didn't figure out.
And you talk about, and you've written in the past, that during those 10 years, you actually wrestled with the question, am I the one that's broken? The environment around me, everybody seems to be comfortable environment. Everybody seems to be monolithic in how they feel in this situation and how they address the culture, if you will, the environment. I'm different. I don't fit this norm. Am I the one that's broken? Could you talk to me a little bit about that arc that you walked through during those 10 years?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first couple of times I got that feedback of like, toughen up, stop showing your emotion, I was actually quite excited. I'm like, great, I can do something. Here's some feedback. I can sink my teeth into it. I want to be better. I want to be successful at this job. I loved construction. I still do. And I was excited to kind of take on the challenge. And then it was like, wait a minute, this isn't working. Like what? And I still kept getting the feedback and I still kept having emotions at work and layer in, 3 kids over 5 years and becoming a mother and all of those things that happened in that first 10 years of my career. It very much got to the point where I was like, maybe I am not cut out to do this job. Maybe it is me. Maybe I am the one that just doesn't have what it takes. And since I couldn't figure it out, and it seemed like the harder I tried, the worse it got, definitely that thought of like, I must be the one that is not cut out for this. This career is not, my jam. I guess I better go find something else. 25 years ago when I started in the career, you didn't see a lot of women on construction job sites. There's a few more now. It's very much a traditional career that's built like very early mornings, very late nights, right. So the more family demands grew, again, that was just another added element of like, whoa, maybe I am not cut out to be in this career. And maybe this is something that I just can't and will never be able to master. And so, I made a few decisions early on in my career from that perspective of I must be the one that doesn't fit. I must be the one that is broken somehow, that can't, figure out how to make it work in this industry.
Right. My experience similar in that I was in an organization that had a very structured way, or structure is probably not the right word, but a very historic way of treating one another, a very historic way of how leadership treated employees. And my natural style, the way I thought that people should be treated and situations should be treated, was not in the norm, we'll call it that. And so I was given advice, like, hey, you've got to toughen up. You need to have thicker skin. If you think this is hot, wait till you get out of the frying pan and into the fire. Like this very much, stop being so feely about this. Stop thinking about how somebody else feels about it. What's right is right by our definition. And so we're going to blaze through this. I too wrestled with the question of, am I the broken one? If you're surrounded by 100 people that all seem to think the same, and I would say seem, with hindsight being 20/20, I don't think all 100. There are just people that are more comfortable suppressing their opinions to fit in. That's not wrong. It's not right. It is. And I felt this burden of like, hey, I feel like the zebra amongst horses, or I feel like, to use a Dr. Seuss reference, I feel like the Sneetch with the star. None of the other Sneetches have stars. I don't fit in, so therefore I must be the outcast. The other thing I struggled with, and I didn't hear it in your phrase, but I struggled with it definitely, is the globalization of that not fitting in. I didn't stop at the line of I don't fit in here. I actually was tempted to take it, I might not be an engineer, or I might not be a designer. I over globalized the lack of fitment rather than saying I'm not compatible with this environment. Not that that makes this environment evil, but it's just not compatible with me. Early in my career, I was tempted to then extrapolate it into my goodness or badness or appropriateness because I was surrounded by people that I thought I was supposed to respect. I was surrounded by people that were successful in life by the definition of career, and they're saying you're not good enough. I at least was tempted. It bled, and ex post facto, I would say, it bled too far into the me-ness than staying just in the, okay, this environment isn't a good fit. It bled too far into my self-confidence, into my self-worth.
So one of the decisions, after I had my first child, I came back to work. I had had an arrangement with my leader at the time. I was going to be in really early, but I had to, do pickup because my husband was doing drop off and he was going to work late. I was going to work early. We had this whole thing. And I remember we were about 3 weeks into this arrangement, and I was leaving one day for work. And as I'm leaving the office at like 3:30 to go pick my daughter up, having been there since 5:30 a.m., there was like 3 or 4 comments made about working part-time and not being there the whole time. And and I was just like, I can't do this. I did all the right things. I made the arrangements. I did the thing. And just, that 3 week of like, I was new into the transition of mom back at work, trying to find the balance. My husband and I are trying to figure this out. Like, I don't think people realize how damaging those comments are. They seem offhanded and somewhat flippant. And it was like the dagger in the back of, I don't know what else to do because I thought I had all the right conversations. And so I definitely at that point made a decision, and I did write off construction, like from the general contractor side of things. I just said, like, I'm not even looking at another general contractor. I just can't do construction in this way. I ended up going to a sales organization. So for an engineer, that's like crossing some kind of line, right? But it was, it kept me in the industry that I knew and love, and I knew a lot about it, but it was a completely different environment, to your point, and a different way of interacting with the industry that I loved.
One of the things I love as part of this podcast is speaking to people that are coming in behind us. Mm-hmm. So you're 10 years out, 15 years out from that environment. You now have the ability to look back with a little more clarity, with a little more maturity, just because of life happening. If you were to put yourself back into that situation, how would you act or react, or how would you play, or would you play the calculus differently, both in when you took the decisions you did, what decisions you took them, the sequence you took them? What would you replay in that situation with what you know now?
It's a great question, because a part of me knows I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had the experiences that I had.
I love that opening comment. I just want to narrate. I love that opening comment because I wrestle with the exact same thing.
Yeah. I know I had those experiences because I'm supposed to be doing the work that I'm doing now. And that experience is what gave me the lived experience, but also the ability to kind of just look back and reflect and to go, what were you supposed to learn there? And what is the message? And I think I left 3 different positions at different stages in my career. When I look back on those, the thing I was supposed to be getting better at and supposed to be learning, I had a very like black and white approach. It was like, I'm going to talk to you once about the thing, and if the thing doesn't change, then I'm going to take that as like your unwillingness to participate. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've learned is, if we want change, it's about repetition over time. I would tell the people coming behind me, we all have our lines of how much we're willing to sit in discomfort and different types of behavior we're willing to tolerate and not tolerate. So I don't ask anybody you got to know yourself in terms of what those limits are for you. But I would say for me, what I needed to learn was a bit of capacity to sit in that discomfort and to advocate for myself. Looking back, I don't think any of my leaders or organizations was trying to like work me out or had a very black and white approach. I just wasn't willing to sit in the conversation long enough. to circle back to say, hey, I don't like, that's not appropriate. That's not what we agreed to. What are we going to do? And how can we find a solution that'll work together? I kind of took their first offer at face value. And if that didn't pan out the way I thought it should, I made the decision, because I also, personality wise, I just don't have like this strong victim identity. I am in control of my life. I fully believe that. So I will make decisions based on that part of my identity. And I think early in my career, did it take me a little bit longer? And could I have maybe not had as many positions? Maybe. But I also think, that's why I started with, I think I had to have those experiences to kind of be able to look back and sort of say, yeah, okay, that was part of the lesson.
Yeah, that's good. I do often wonder, and myself, I would put this in the same category, the education that an engineer gets has a very black and white component to it. Mm-hmm. You don't negotiate with physics. They are what they are. And I do wonder if there's a temptation for engineers early in their career to view the boss or the organization or leadership in the same way. It's like, you said this. I take it as if it's the first law of physics, which is unchangeable, unbendable. And I think there is a domain in which, whether you learn it at the used car lot, whether you learn it in your marriage or with your children, you're going to learn it somewhere, that relationship is much more of a negotiated domain than a declarative or a binary domain. And I, as you say that, Erin, I can look back too and say, early in my career, I said, well, you said this, and therefore, because you said this, that means this and this and this. And the person looking back and be like, I don't even remember saying that. Sorry. What do you mean you don't remember saying that? I've thought about it for 100 hours since you've said it.
No, it's very true. It's very true. And, I now have the privilege of working with engineering students at our local university in a leadership program. And we often talk about this. It's like in every other class, in every other aspect of your technical work, there will be black and white and right and wrong. And there will be a set of variables and parameters and all the things. And the one place that doesn't apply is people. You got to learn an entirely different skill set. And I think, honestly, that's what those experiences were for me, was just the school of hard knocks, I guess is what it is, of learning people are not black and white. They are not a data set. There is no right answer. There are a lot of different answers and a lot of different ways to the same or similar outcomes. And for me, it was building the capacity to sit in that and to be able to negotiate and navigate the people side of engineering. Yeah.
The other part, and I would just build upon what you said, as I look back at my experiences early in my career, I have the same, I'll say, conflicted view of what would I have done or should I have done or would I change? Because, as you said, a critical component of who I am today and my passion today is a direct result of what was learned, both in the positive sense and in the negative sense, what was learned in those early years. I would also say, I think in general, people fall in a continuum. There are some that tend to move quickly in discomfort, and there are others that tend to really value the roots and just take the pain and take the pain and take the pain. And as you experience life, whether that's relationships with friends, whether that's relationships with organizations, you're going to start to get a little bit of calibration of where you fall on that spectrum, whether you're a quick jumper, 2 bad days in a row and I'm out, or if you're a long sufferer that says, man, this thing has been consuming and burning me at both ends for so long, but to be a good soldier, I'm going to take the next step. And I would say, as you learn where you are on that scale, there are some that the right advice is, hey, you need to stick it out a little bit longer. And it is because I think the fastest rate of maturation happens in trial. The fastest rate of growth does happen under the pain and difficulty of a trial. Sometimes that trial is not invited, it happens to you. And other times you step into it and say, hey, I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm going to try it. And it ends up being pretty hard. I think there's another person, the exact same scenario, the other person, the advice might be, you need to get out. You need to get out because you've tried 6 different ways and you've tried this and you've tried that. So it is to say it's next to impossible to make a blatant statement that says after this many events or this many occurrences, you need to make this decision. But I do think, at least for me, there is this, and it's hard, it's very difficult in situ to determine, but there is a subtle difference that happens between being refined and I'm being consumed. And it's difficult in situ to know exactly where that line is. But that was the question that I was trying to ask myself through these situations. If I'm being refined, I want to be here. This is where I want to be, because this is the path to maturation. If I'm being consumed, and I'm not talking about one meeting, but over a period of time, if I'm being consumed and it starts to bleed into the nature of who I am. I literally was in an organization that I felt like the hard-coded source code of my personality was being rewritten by the environment that I was in. And I said, I don't want to grow up to be that kind of person.
Yeah.
Things are happening to my personality that I don't want them to happen. I need to get out. I'm being consumed. And so even those are qualitative statements. They're not quantitative statements. And for an engineer, that can be, myself included, that's very, well, today was I consumed or today was I refined? That's not, you can't ask it at that level. But that construct was helpful for me, because I do believe that, generally speaking, societally, with the mobility that everybody has, you can spend a career running from every trial. And you can end up at the end of your career not having the refinement, not having the formation that could have been had you had the opportunity to stay in the heat in some of those situations. And so I don't have blanket advice for people. I just have a construct of my experience, which is to say, there are situations I look back to today and I say, yeah, it still causes cold sweats when I think about it. And I do. There's a few situations. You ask me what I would do in hindsight. Well, if you asked me on the wrong day, I would probably just throat punch them and walk out. Like, not the right behavior, not what I should have done. That's a long and wondrous answer, but it is to say, I think the thing to pass back to people that are earlier on the path is not every bad day is worth jumping from. There's a lot of bad days that set you up for success in the future and having a resiliency. And you said the capacity for it, building that capacity is a critical component of an early career building exercise.
Love everything you just said. And I think not only if you jump from every trial, because I think you're absolutely right, the way the world is today, you could miss a lot of lessons at the first inkling of something difficult. I happen to live with one, but I also have met many in my career and in the work that I'm doing who sit and do become recoded and consumed. Yeah. And again, a non-decision is a decision, right?
Yes.
It's everything you do, whether you are consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it, is a decision towards who you will become in the future. And I think that's really the question that I now ask myself, right? Is whatever this is, the action, the situation, the environment, aligned with who I want to be in 10 years, 5 years, you know? And it did get to the point probably around the 15-year mark for me where I did start asking those questions in those trials. And it was like, okay, let's try something new. Let's have 2 or 3 conversations about this. Let's see what they have to say. Let's try this from different angles. Let's work on things instead of just taking it at face value. Let's see where this might go. Let's make sure that we're really clear about what it is we're asking for, what it is we think we need. Have I been heard? You know, and it was interesting because when I remember leaving one role and I said, you know, what do you think I have been asking for the last 2.5 years? And the leader was able to repeat back to me exactly what it was. And I was like, yes. And you agree that is not something you can provide. And he's like, absolutely not. And I'm like, then I am making the right decision 100%. Yeah. And that was a big turning moment for me because it was like, I really felt like I stayed in it long enough to determine and got validation that what I was seeing was actually true and that they confirmed for me that they could not offer my next move and the level of responsibility and the position that I was looking for. And so it was like, and it was a neat way to leave because it was very friendly. No. You know, correct. It was just like, you're right. We can't give you what you need and want next. And we wish you all the best to go and get that. And to me, that's the win, right? Is like, okay, I stayed in it long enough. You know what I want. I know what you can give. We've done this. And I think, so I am very much someone who will make a quick decision, live with the consequences, right or wrong. My husband is somebody who will sit in that discomfort for an ample amount of time far longer than one should. Great quality to have in a husband, let me tell you. Probably why we're celebrating 25 years next year. But as far as an employee goes, there have been moments where I'm like, I don't think your health is worth this. Like,
right.
And those have been some interesting conversations for us to have. Will he ever make decisions as quickly as I do? Probably not. But it is interesting. And that's what I would say to people who are coming up is like, know yourself. And if you are somebody who tends to make quicker decisions, find somebody that doesn't, so they can be a bit of a mirror and a reflector. And if you are somebody that will sit in discomfort for years and years and years, find somebody who sees the world a little differently. Because again, I think we need that balance. I think we need that difference of perspectives to kind of go, yeah, why am I sitting in this discomfort? Or why am I ready to jump ship at the first bad day?
Yeah. You touched a really important question that I love asking younger people earlier in their career. So much focus on what do you want to be? And that's the wrong question at so many levels. It is the question of who do you want to be? And the reason is who do you want to be survives reorgs. It survives layoffs. It survives relocations. What do you want to be is in a construct, whether it's in an organization or whether it's within your life. It's a construct that is built on unstable ground. One reorg and the division manager job that you've been trying to get for the last 10 years disappears or gets outsourced or this or this or this, or the company's sold and all your political equity, all your political capital is evaporated and these things. These are real things. What can survive all of that is the lens of who do I want to be? What disciplines, what experiences do I want to learn to be good at? I really appreciate that question. One other question that I have, and this is as I've listened to your podcast and read some of your content, your experience very much was around and in the lens under which you saw the situation, which is, I think, an appropriate lens, was that you were a female in a male-dominated environment.
Yeah.
And the interesting part, at least as I've thought about that, I was not a female in a male-dominated environment, but I was in an environment that I didn't fit into. For me, I was similarly looking for, what is this thread? I don't fit. I know I don't fit. What is this thread? In my situation, I was a white Caucasian male, the same as everybody else was. For me, the event was finding out, I believe, that I'm much more of a fast to fail person, much more of a try it, figure it out in flight person. And I was in an industry and an environment that was much more risk averse for good reasons. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have been, but it was similarly, I had to find like, what is it about me that is different than this environment and why doesn't it fit in? As you've said, you don't have a victim mentality. So it's not that you then go to the rest of your life and say, all males are bad and females are good. That's not what you're saying. But what I have done, and I think as I've internalized this, is I now do go to different environments and say, okay, how fast to fail is this environment? And how adaptable to fast to fail is this environment versus other environments? As you've gone to your next and next and next roles and opportunities, what are the things that you're looking for now that say, okay, this is a better fit for me because of who I am, as you've learned from that first environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love the description of fast to fail, because I think as an industry engineering, again, broad brushstrokes, not everyone fits into this. I certainly was one that didn't. As an industry, it's an industry built on facts. There's a right answer. There's research. There's codes and structure for a good reason. All the respect in the world for all of those things. They are just not my jam. I am not a detail person. I don't read the fine print. I make very quick decisions. And so for me, whatever the role or the environment, like where I will thrive is where I can lean into that. But I also have come to realize that I need the fact checker, the researcher, the data person right there beside me. And I used to push that away. I didn't see it as a complementary skill set to mine. Again, I live it every day because I live with an engineer who is like that. And we have come to this place where we now can make great decisions together, but we know which pieces of that decision each other's going to own. And so if I equate that professionally, like even just in running my own business, I know I need someone to watch the numbers, to proofread the slide decks, to do all of that detail work that's going to drive me crazy, and I'm just not going to do it. And I have gotten up in front of hundreds of people before with spelling mistakes on my slides because I have not taken the time to get it proofread because it's just not important to me. But I also understand how unprofessional that might look, especially when you do it in front of a room of 500 engineers, right? Like these are mistakes I'm willing to make. My heart doesn't even skip a beat when that happens. And I know for other people, that would be like career suicide, right? So for me, I need that environment where I can make decisions, fail fast, like you said. For me, it's about a dynamic sort of environment. Like I get bored doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Repetition, consistency, all of those things. Like I don't have a consistent morning routine because I can't stand when it gets repetitive,
Right.
So
right.
I need like a basket of goods I can pick from and go from there, where I know other people need. I wake up at this time and I do the same thing and I go to work at the same time. And, my files are all in order. Don't look at my file structure. It's a disaster. So for me, that was the piece of the engineering mold that I broke. And I'm much more willing. I love, and I think that's what draws me now to this work is I love the unpredictability of the human experience. I love sitting in conversations with people and, how did you perceive that situation and what story are you telling yourself? And, when you get into a room full of people or a team in a room full of people and you get 7 different stories from the same event, to me, that's exciting, right? Whereas I know my husband would probably rather poke his eyeballs out with a pen than, have to live through that conversation. But I think that's the beauty of it is it just takes, we all have something to offer.
Yeah. My guess is, Erin, a spelling error in front of 500 engineers is far less likely to be caught than a math error. My guess is you could have probably gotten it by 475 of those engineers.
That probably is true.
But if you made a math error, they probably would have carried you out on a pitchfork if you did a math error in front of everybody. That's my guess. But I don't know if I've ever caught a spelling error, and I'm certain I've made hundreds of them today. I want to circle back a little bit on these organizations.
Yeah.
We described organizations, and some of it is, I think, properly because they are older industries, construction, some of these are older industries. They are highly regulated industries for good reasons, as we said. Some of them are also companies that are aged, either they're second generation, third generation, fourth generation. There are components that show up not just because of the industry they're in, but because of the age of the organization that does create somewhat of a monolithic mindset in the leadership domain. That there's a lot of the leaders that think, act the same. And what I'm interested in your experience, I have my own set of experience. How much of it, your experience, do you think that happens because of nature versus nurture in these organizations where they become very narrow in their leadership approach over time?
That's a good one. I love this question because I think this, for me, it goes back to, I think we don't even know our human programming is kind of running, looking for a sense of belonging. We're constantly looking for how can I fit in, right? Whether that's at a house party or an industry event or work or a community, volunteer role, whatever it is, we don't give it enough credit that our brain is constantly searching for ways to fit in. Because I think social rejection is like one of the biggest fears that we all have. Sure. Whether you acknowledge it or not, at a fundamental survival level, we need to be in groups as human beings. And so there's this real deep drive to belong. And I think this is true for every organization. There is a culture being created, whether it's intentional or not. When I look at the industries of construction and engineering, there was a very dominant culture, tended to attract a certain demographic, a certain age, a certain gender, a certain socioeconomic status. That maybe wasn't intentional and maybe wasn't set out to be that, but it is that. We were driving by a construction site the other day. I had the kids in the car, and my one son was like, Mom, look, there's a pink porta potty down there. And I'm like, yeah, that's because they have a woman on site and they have to have one. I said, I used to have them on every job site I was on with a lock because they're clean and the boys always want to use it. because it's clean. And they're like, what? You had your own bathroom? And it was like things that we don't, like, they never even would have thought about. But I remember my first few jobs having to go into the estimate and change the number of porta potties from 1 to 2 because we had to have 2. It's a very small, tiny little example and a very small expense line in the estimate, but it was something that was often overlooked. And so unless you're intentionally creating an environment where many different people belong and people see that visually, and I can walk into this space and go, oh, I either see someone like me or somebody takes the time to make me feel welcome or they think about me, right? Like if somebody had just put in the estimate 2 porta potties because we have a girl, that means that somebody else is thinking about me. I know I belong. But because I kept having to push like, hey, you forgot about me again. You forgot about me again. Then it makes you feel like, do I really belong here? When you are the minority or the different person, whether that's in how you make decisions, your gender, sex, race, whatever it is, when you are the different, unless somebody's actively working to include you, you always feel like, do I really belong here?
Right.
And so I think your question had to do with nature and nurture. It just kind of popped back into my head. There is definitely a nature part of it that if we're not careful and if we're left to our own devices, we will create groups that think and act like us.
Yeah.
Because we want ease of decision making. We want to belong. Like, and there's the path of least resistance is to have a group that think and act like you. Let's be clear. If I surround myself with people that think and act like me, I never get challenged, right? We're just going to do our thing and it's going to be easy, but it's not going to be right. And it may not be the best. Learning to work with somebody or a group of people, and that's kind of the nurture part of it, that do think and act differently, and seeing that challenge as a way to get better helps us create more intentional environments. And I think that's kind of where we're at in the industry right now. I mean, and is it hard work? Absolutely. It's really hard work because it's very conscious work.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, especially older organizations and even larger industries, more isolated industries, there is a nature and a nurture aspect to it. I've heard the phrase before that like hires like. It just lines up with what you said, is that typically as a leader, you're going to value the disciplines that you're good at. You don't even have to say that out loud. You've shared in the interview here that you and your husband have different ways of thinking about, and that's a learned skill of valuing a different perspective on a situation. And so oftentimes it's the urgency. We got to get this done. We got projects, we're behind, and the skill sets that got us here will continue to extend us and get better. There is, generally speaking, in an unintentional way, there is a prioritization of similar skill sets by leadership for those that they bring up. And then there's also multiple dynamics in which not rocking the boat is the best way to advance in a lot of ways. There's multiple natural tendencies pushing towards the continuation of a leadership style from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. It does create over time a narrower and narrower skill set that is valued not just by leaders, but also by the employees that are working for those leaders.
Yeah.
I want to transition a little bit. You lead a podcast that's called Tactical Empathy. My first question is, what was the road from engineering school, which is not where you would expect podcasters to come from, into podcasting? And then we'll get to the subject matter after that.
Yeah, for sure. Interestingly enough, around the 15-year mark in my career, that's kind of when all of these things started to kind of crystallize and take place. And I started to really look back, and I ended up doing a lot of journaling at that time. And when I was sharing things with my mentor, she said, you need to write this, or it was already written. She's like, you need to put this together in a book. And I'm like, I'm not a writer. I'm an engineer. Like, I barely got through English 30, like it was just like, I just had to graduate with English. I didn't need it for my career. In fact, it's one of the reasons I picked engineering school, because I didn't have this dream to be an engineer. It was just, I didn't need my English mark from high school to get into engineering school. And I didn't have to take a university English class. I got to take technical writing, which was procedures and manuals. So great. So I'm like, are you crazy? Like, I'm not going to write a book. This is nuts. Anyway, I wrote a book in 2016. And what's interesting is when people ask me about how did you sit down and actually write this book, I didn't actually write it. I spoke it. I voice to texted on walks and when I was in the car and when I'm sitting in coffee shops waiting for kids in between sports on the sidelines. It was like a thought would pop into my head and I would just hit record and it would voice to text it, or it would go into a voice memo and then I would annotate it. After I published the book, people are like, oh, you're a writer, you're an author. And I would sit down to write and it was just like painful. Like I couldn't even think about the first sentence to write because I would edit as I was writing and it was awful. And so probably for like 6 or 7 years after the book, I really struggled to develop content and to get my thoughts out because I was so self-editing in the writing process of like sitting down to type the written form. It was a bit of a challenge, to be honest, from a coach. She's like, I really want you to start a podcast because I think you need to speak this out because I've always loved to talk. And after the book was published, no problems getting on stage and speaking, but put me in front of a computer and try to write an article, that was a task. And so end of 2023, this coach I was working with at the time kind of threw it out there and was like, I want to see you start a podcast next year. And the rest is history. So...
And you chose empathy as your topic. As you said, the name of the podcast is Tactical Empathy. Talk to me about that as the focal point of your teaching. What led you? Obviously, we know your story now. What was the path that said empathy is the thing that I really want to inject into others? I really want to teach people on the topic of empathy.
Great question. So if I look back in my own story, I think early on in those years, I had an abundance of emotions. I probably identified as an empath, how most people would define that. I could walk into a construction boardroom and pick up on every emotion that each subtrade was feeling. And I didn't even know that I was taking that on at the time. And then I had my own feelings about how are we going to get this done? And the budget's over and the schedule's this and the owner's mad and the architect's this, right? Like I had all my own stuff. And I was picking up on all of this. When I started to journal about my experience and what it was I wanted to take out of it, I had to learn how to not get so tied up in all the rest of the emotion and to deal with my own first and to really sort out how I was feeling, what I needed, what I wanted, and then to kind of be able to listen and separate from others. Because I would very quickly take that on and then want to help you through that situation. And then I had this experience with leaders of my own who had no idea what I was thinking or feeling.
Sure.
Who just do it. Why are you taking this so personally? Like, had no concept. There's this continuum, I think, this is kind of what we talk about, is there's people that identify as, I don't do emotion. There's no room for it. It's unnecessary. We don't need it. And then there's those of us, and I was on this other far end of the spectrum that was like, I got an abundance of emotion and I don't know what to do with it. And I feel everything, and it just bleeds out of me all the time. For me, the topic of tactical empathy is getting all of us to the middle of the spectrum where it's like, we know and understand what's going on with us. We can see and understand what might be going on with someone else. And we develop that capacity, that ability to kind of sit with both and then continue on from there. So there is an action part of it, because I think when most people think of empathy, they think of like, we're going to have this kumbaya moment and sit in all these feelings and nothing's ever going to get done. And so that's really why it's like this tactical approach, because it's a tool in our leadership toolbox. And when I think about my leadership experience, the ones that I had the best experience with were the ones that could do that. They didn't let me off the hook. They didn't reduce the workload. They didn't set the bar lower. They didn't let things slide. They had very high standards. They expected a lot, but they took time to understand what was going on with me. Mm-hmm. And so it was the blend of both. And that's the kind of leader I now strive to be. So instead of taking it all on and not knowing what's going on with me, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on with me and what might be going on with you. And then let's have a conversation, because there are things that need to be done.
So to the leader that is on the first end of that spectrum, that themselves doesn't process, or even at the front of their mind isn't their feelings of a situation, there's just tasks and actions and dates. How do you describe empathy to that person?
Great question.
Because as you said, their initial is like, hey, this is all sitting around a campfire and talking about our parents. How do you approach that leader, the first leader that really doesn't understand even what empathy is by your definition?
Yeah. There's a number of different ways I might approach that conversation. Probably the first one would be, a part of empathy is understanding thoughts. So can you try to, what might lead somebody to think that way? Why might they have made that decision or taken that action or not taken that action or sent that email or not sent the email?
Yeah.
Like, to me, it's just about understanding, whether that's on a feelings level, on a cognitive level, on a behavioral level. Let's just try for a moment to understand where that individual might be at. And then let's go test it and see, right? One of the things I'm thinking about is, you might have sent that email because you thought it was going to help you get the outcome that you wanted, right? That might be the logical thing. And the person might say, yeah, I did. And it's like, okay, so now I have a bit more of an understanding of where you're coming from. Instead of this like, well, it wasn't the way I would approach it, so it's wrong. Or it doesn't make sense. And especially with engineers, we can get around to talking about feelings, and they are there. They'll tell you eventually that they do have a feeling. But I think more often than not, they have access to it when we talk about like how people approach problems, how they think, what their perspective might be, what their lived experience might be, that is all feeding into how they showed up in that situation, and either did or didn't do the thing you thought they should do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if you've ever come across the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Yep.
I read that book maybe 6 months ago or so, and it was a really interesting read. Not one of those books that I took a ton away from, but one that was just the psychology behind it was really interesting to me. So the author is the executive coach who gets essentially called in for the high performing leader that's a total jerk. Usually that's how he describes it. And I don't have the exact quote, but essentially his approach with these people is, it's going to cost you money to not be empathetic. You are limiting your career. And he even highlights that these are self-motivated people. These are self-driven people. These are kind of selfish people in a lot of ways. And so his approach was essentially just to bulldozer the wall and say, it's a skill you got to learn if you want to make more money. He didn't take any high ground of trying to convince these leaders that empathy was worth having, other than you won't drive the car you want to drive if you don't learn this thing. At one level, I was like kind of offended that he didn't go to the merits of empathy as a leadership style. But then at another level, you're like, hey, you just kind of took the shortcut. I mean, you're not going to teach these people not to want more money, so you might as well leverage their desire and shortcut the path. So it was a funny book to read, because it's like, I would never coach anybody like this. And you get to the end and you're like, it's probably a pretty effective way to take somebody who's never thought for a second about other people and convince them, you better figure it out, because your number one is you, and it's going to cost the number one if you don't start caring about somebody else.
Yeah.
It was just a funny aside on the topic of teaching empathy to executives.
Well, and it's true. I guess what I've run into in my work is there's this belief that empathy is an all-encompassing like leadership style that leaves no space for anything else. And I have started recently to think about like, what is the analogy? So if we think about our leadership skills as a toolbox, and we have negotiating skills, and we have conflict skills, and we have communication skills, and we've got presentation skills, and we've got tough conversation skills, and we've got all these tools in the toolbox. To me, empathy is one of them. And I'm trying to, so then I was thinking, okay, what tool would it be? And to me, it's the tape measure, because it's like, it doesn't really do much. If you think about it in terms of a tool, it's not driving a nail, it's not cutting a piece of wood, like it's not, but it always is that measure of how am I doing? Am I on track? Am I going in the right direction? It's the thing you use to start, it's the thing you use during the middle, and it's the thing you use at the end to go, did I do what I said I was going to do? To me, that's the tool. If you don't have it, you might get the nail in the wall, but is it in the right place? Right? You might hang the picture, but is it straight? I don't know. Right. That's kind of how I look at empathy, is like it's a tool in the toolbox. It helps us to see if we're on the right path. Are we going where we want to go with this team? Are we getting, are we making progress towards the goals, whatever those goals are? Yeah.
The other way I've heard you describe it, it was also extremely helpful for me, was you described empathy as a muscle. Mm-hmm. And that was a helpful analogy for me, because let's just pick the bicep as an example. Every person is born with a bicep. Some of them, it's genetically more predisposed to be stronger or to look bigger or other people are weaker. Everybody has one. They don't all have the same starting condition. They don't all have the same top end, but any given person that chooses to work out will see progress on that muscle as it moves from the natural state, whether it be an advanced natural state or a retreated natural state. They will improve as they put effort into it. With that in mind, what are practical things that you advise people to do to work out the muscle of empathy as they think about that in leadership?
Absolutely. That scale we talked about earlier, whether you don't do emotion or you got too much of it, the first thing that we all have to do to kind of start to work out that muscle is to really look at what is going on with me. Because even if you don't think you have a feeling driving your actions. And it might be irritation, it might be frustration, it might be resentment, overwhelm, whatever it is, there's something driving the behavior that you have. The way you're showing up to the meeting, the way you're sending the email, are you pounding it out on the keyboard or are you writing it with a smile on your face? There is a feeling there. And so I think that's the first step. And what I usually tell people is just do a very simple check-in with yourself, either in the shower, brushing your teeth, or making your coffee in the morning. Whatever you do in the morning that always happens, that's when I do the check-in. What's going on with me today? Am I tired? Am I grouchy? Am I hungry? Am I feeling particularly irritated about something? And I might do that a few times, especially if I'm going into a bigger meeting, if there's a client thing, if there's a tougher conversation with a teammate that I'm anticipating. I might do a check-in that goes, what am I bringing into this conversation? Because it will come out. Mm-hmm. This is the funny piece is, I got all this coaching early on in my career that I needed a game face. I don't care how good a game face you have, how you feel will come out in the meeting, in the email, in the interaction, in the phone conversation, whether your face says it or not, it'll come out. So I think that's kind of step one. And then I think step two is really taking the time to just acknowledge. I think this is the step most of us miss, especially if you are from any kind of technical industry where problem solving is what you get paid to do. I think engineers are particularly bad at this because we go right from problem to solution. And so with empathy, there's this piece of acknowledgement in the middle. So I'm observing this in myself. Can I acknowledge it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did have a run-in with the kids, getting them out the door this morning. That was particularly difficult and took a lot out. Or there was a situation in traffic, or I got in and the report was late, or the report didn't say what I wanted it to say. Whatever it is just allow that feeling to be okay in yourself and in others. So if we can kind of observe and then acknowledge, and then it's okay, we still have to get X, Y, Z done. How are we going to do that? There's some curiosity in that last piece that I think is part of building the muscle. Initial steps might be, body weight exercises would be just notice what's going on with you and the other person. Then we add a little 5-pound dumbbell in there around validation. Yeah, I can see that would be tough, or I can see that would be overwhelming, or I recognize your frustration. Just validate it. You don't have to agree with it. I think that's another big misconception that I see a lot of leaders. They don't want to get into the feelings conversation because they feel like they have to agree with it. And I'm you don't have to agree. You just have to validate for that person at that moment in time, they feel the way they feel.
I wonder, is there also the temptation, and maybe this is more from the technical disciplines, and it could also just be a male thing as well. There's also a temptation that we got to fix it. Versus validating, fixing it and validating it. Those are different things.
Totally different things. And that's what I mean. We want to go right to solution. And because as soon as somebody starts talking about something, you're already oh, well, if that was me, I would do this and this and this. And I've got all the things and I can see 8 different pathways. And I think number 2 is the best. So by the time they're done talking about the thing, you already have the solution. You don't even know if they want the solution at this point. Right? They may just needed to say, hey, I'm frustrated and overwhelmed, but I know how I'm going to get through it. You haven't given the conversation space for that yet.
The phrase that I use when I'm talking to my friends is, I just need you to hold the barf bag. I don't need a solution. I don't even need you to reply. Just hold the barf bag for a second. And so I will call a friend and just be okay, just hold the barf bag. Let's go. And then get it out. And that's all we need.
I love that. I was talking to a client this morning and he's like, yeah, I've tried that with my wife before where I'm like, do you need me to listen or do you want a solution? And then she gets mad at me for asking the question because I should already know what she wants. And I'm like, well, yeah, there might not be any winning on that front, but
that's right.
Yeah.
You highlight something that's interesting. I had not pieced this together, but it seems to fit together. I think it's possible in some of the technical disciplines where your customer may be a spec or your customer at some level, if you're an individual contributor, is a project, that leap to leadership might be the first time in your career that empathy is a critical role. Whereas if I look at a role, maybe say in sales, you can't get out of the starting gate in your career without some degree of empathy. And so I do wonder if maybe disciplines like engineering, some of the sciences, I'm sure there's other ones, that you actually can be mid-career having never done a single exercise to work the empathy muscle, and you make that leap from really, really sound individual contributor to, in many ways, wholly incapable as a leader because you just have not had to demonstrate that empathetic, worried about what other people think because you've been negotiating with physics rather than people through the first half of your career.
It's interesting because a lot of the time, as I get more and more into this work, what I do find is a lot of, we'll call them technical industries, especially if they are designing like consumer products or any public facing anythings, they will have thought about empathy from the standpoint of, what does this thing need to do? What service is it providing? What problem is it fixing? How do we want people to use the thing, interact with the thing? Do we want it to evoke a feeling? They're thinking about empathy from that perspective, but it's
from its generic.
It's very generic. It's very broad brush strokes. It's like a group of people, right? It's like, how do we want the students to use the school versus thinking about one particular student and then having to sit down and interact with that student.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference. They've had some experience, but they don't really have to think about themselves in that. Right? They don't have to think about what am I bringing into this design discussion. They're not flexing that part of the muscle. So some of them, I think there's a bit of false confidence, I would say, when they get into the leadership because they're like, oh yeah, I've worked with empathy before, but it's like, not really. Because they're still working with it in the problem set, not in a relationship perspective.
Would you say not in a tactical way?
Not in a tactical way.
That's
there you
right.
go.
That's right.
Thanks, Justin.
Erin, it's been so good to spend time talking about our career experiences, how those have formed us into the people we are today, our passion and your passion for passing it back to others, that information, and passing back the knowledge that you've picked up and teaching them how to do better in their roles. It's been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. I have had a blast talking to you as well.
For those that wish to share praise, feedback, accolades, or large sums of money, you can reach me at justin@grody.io. For those with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, or if you believe that I'm a classical ignoramus or a dunderheaded fop, please express your concerns via singing telegram to 167 Hemdale Street, Los Angeles, California. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.